What is up, fantasy footballers? Welcome to the Fantasy Planet, the Fantasy Football Podcast. We got you when it comes to all things in the realm of fantasy football, helping you destroy your league mates, and of course, giving you that astronomical advantage, as always. It's just me today. I'm not going to waste your time. Let's get right into it. So today, I'm going to be going over the worst players in every round of your draft. Cannot be drafting these guys. You draft them, you put yourself in a significant disadvantage. And in terms of where these guys are getting drafted, we're using the ADP on average, the top 4 fantasy sites. So let's get right into it. Round 1. This might be controversial because he's number 2 overall player, Christian McCaffrey. He's getting up there in age. He's missed games in the past. In 2020 and 2021 combined, he's missed 22 games. Compared to last year, he finally came back and was able to put together a full healthy season. He's 27 years old. Now, Kittle, Debo, Ayuk, Mitchell, all healthy here. It's hard to see him sustaining that consistent production that you're expecting out of your second overall pick. Anybody in the first round, you're expecting to be your most consistent producer on your team. And when you're getting this guy at the second overall pick, you just can't trust him as much as the other guys in the first round. In his games with Elijah Mitchell, he had 15.2 fantasy points per game. And obviously, when Elijah Mitchell was out, he was much better than that. But that's what we're expecting this year, Elijah Mitchell to be healthy. 15 fantasy points per game out of your second overall pick. That's not great. Of course, he's Christian McCaffrey. We know what he can do. He was consistently the number 1 overall fantasy player for you in the last few years. But compared to the other first-round picks, there's just too many red flags with him. And you're expecting this consistent fantasy production. Out of the second overall pick, you can't be drafting him here. The guy who can't be drafted in the second round is Derrick Henry. In the second round, again, it's pretty much like the first round where you're looking for this high-end production week in, week out. The only difference here is that you can kind of take a few more swings for upside in the second round. But with Derrick Henry, obviously, he's Derrick Henry. We know what he can do. But his efficiency numbers dropped last year. He's 29 years old. He did start to catch some passes last year, but now that they add Tyjae Spears in the third round, who's been looking amazing in the preseason, Tyjae Spears can be expected to take a lot of his third down work, and he's just a better receiver than Derrick Henry. In college, he showed that. Derrick Henry has had 1,877 total touches in his career. That's a crazy number. That's average 300 touches every year. Normally when we see a guy get 300 touches in one year, he's almost guaranteed to fall off the next year, but we know he's Derrick Henry. But at this age, if you go over and look at RotoViz, it'll show players that have had the same amount of production in one year and what they've done the next year, so we can kind of predict what Derrick Henry will be like for next season. Every single guy who had a similar season to Derrick Henry last year declined at least a little bit the next year. So drafting him here in the middle of round 2 and expecting him to keep up what he's been doing for the past few years is just too high for me. If he falls in the third, go grab him in the middle of the third. But in the second round, there's a lot of wide receivers available. I'm just not taking the risk on Derrick Henry in the second round. Please do not draft Mark Andrews in round 3. This offseason, they signed OBJ, they drafted Zay Flowers. Rashad Bateman is finally healthy. Considering that this is a team that loves to run the ball, they have a lot more options now in the pass game. They bring in a new offensive coordinator, so you can kind of expect them to lean more in the pass game than they did in previous years. But with these added options now, they're not going to look to Mark Andrews every single time they're throwing the ball like they did in the past. He exploded early in the year. The Ravens' offense was clicking. But from week 7 on last year, he averaged 8.4 fantasy points per game. Now, obviously, Lamar was injured towards the end, but Lamar played in over half of those games. He was still averaged 8.4 points per game. I just think there's tight end options only a little bit worse than him 2 or 3 rounds later in the draft. So I like this round 3 for running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks even. So I don't like the value on Mark Andrews here. Round 4, the worst player is DK Metcalf. Now, we made a TikTok about this guy, so I won't spend too long talking about it, but he finished top 10 to 15 overall last year. However, he was outside the top 20 points per game these last 2 years. They add JSN, they add Charbonnet. They're still going to throw the ball a lot, but now they have a pass-catching option out of the backfield in Charbonnet, the best receiver in that rookie class. I don't know if Geno Smith will be able to support all these guys. The fantasy market's pretty low on Geno Smith, so it's kind of odd to me to see all these guys getting drafted so highly, all these Seahawks weapons getting drafted so highly, and Geno down so far. DK Metcalf is super talented as a player, of course. He's just not going to return the investment you make on him in the 4th round here. Round 5, do not draft Damien Pierce. He's the RB1 of the Texans. Of course, Texans will lean on him. He got 20 touches per game last year. This is the worst offense in the NFL. I don't want the RB1 in the offense, especially when they add Devin Singletary, who's a very serviceable running back, as your second option. He could steal some passing work. Pierce had 3.1 targets per game last year, but he was pretty inefficient with them. He only had 4.1 yards per target. Especially with Singletary coming in, he's not going to have this receiving upside. He doesn't have the touchdown upside because this is the league's worst offense, so they're not going to be scoring position much. He's not going to add that value there. In addition to Singletary, they add a bunch of other wide receiver options, Tank Dell, Robert Woods, a few other veteran wide receivers, even though they let go of Brandon Cooks. But considering that, the Texans aren't going to have to give Dameon Pierce the ball every single play like they did last year. I like all the other running back options in this range over Pierce, like Miles Sanders, Breece Hall, James Conner. All these guys I feel have a higher floor and higher upside, so I'm not sure why you're drafting Dameon Pierce this high. For the 6th round, I actually like a lot of the guys in this range. I do not like Mike Williams. They draft Quinton Johnston, 1st round. Mike Williams is 29 years old now. He dealt with some injuries last year. He's a big downfield target guy, so touchdowns are a big part of his game. They have Eckler. They have Keenan Allen, who's okay in the red zone, and now they had Quinton Johnston, who's a big guy as well, who can take away some of these touchdowns. Mike Williams has cleared 1,000 yards only twice in his 6-year career. In one of those years, he had 1,001 yards, so it's like barely 1,000 yards. But he's been below 40th in wide receiver points per game 4 out of the 6 years of his career. And now he's being drafted around wide receiver 25. And that is way too high for a guy who has all these negatives surrounding him. Don't be drafting Mike Williams. The worst pick in round 7 is DeAndre Swift. Obviously, the Eagles do run the ball a lot, but now they have a 3-man committee. They bring in Penny. They have Gainwell that they really like. Reports out of camp and preseason are that Gainwell is expected to be used the most out of these 3 backs. Swift is a good pass-catching back, but now in Philly, Hurts is not going to check down the ball as much as they did in Detroit. And Gainwell is also a very good pass-catching back, so we don't know if Swift is even going to be out here on every 3rd down. Another big part of his game was touchdowns. Over the last 3 years, he's averaged 8.3 touchdowns a year. But as we know, Hurts is used heavily at the goal line. Swift's goal line rushes are going to drop off significantly with all the other options in Philly in addition to Hurts. Now he's averaged 4.7 yards per carry over his career, and the efficiency should stay because this Eagles line is so good, but the opportunity is just not there. He's not going to have as much volume as he's had over his career. In the 7th round here, that's way too high for Swift. Round 8, last guy here is Treylon Burks. Now, I was going to talk about A.J. Dillon, but he got a lot of first-team reps in the preseason week 2, so I'm fine with you drafting A.J. Dillon in the 8th round here. But with Treylon Burks, he was being drafted as about the wide receiver 30 prior to the Hopkins signing to the Titans, so people weren't really betting on him when there was no competition and no threats behind him. The Titans' offense is almost completely off running the football. And when they do throw the ball, it's going to go to Hopkins. Last year, Treylon Burks, 8.6 points per game, ranked 56th among receivers. That was, of course, without Hopkins, without any other significant receiving threats. Now, if you are betting on this guy, you're solely betting off the talent here. Of course, he was a 1st-round pick. 8th round is just way too high for a guy that's never produced, especially now that you add in Hopkins, considering he did nothing last year when there was no competition along with him. That's going to do it for the video. Don't be drafting these guys at their current ADPs. Jack will be here next week to talk about some running back rankings. But yeah, it's going to do it. If you want to hear your takes too, comment down below with your suggestions or your take on some of our takes. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment. Join the Discord. We want to talk to some of you guys out there. Follow all the socials. See you next week. Peace.